Three words: National Public Radio. Definitely come to mind. I had pictures of Don Byas before I got hip to him on National Public Radio, but it's one thing to have pictures and another thing to actually hear him, you know. There was a radio show back on in the 80s on National Public Radio that was from 8 to 11 every Saturday. It was called Jazz Yesterday, and the host's name was Jim Gallard. And this was our affiliate back in Detroit, WDET, who I'm still friends with to this day. Jim and I are like, you know, that's another guy I definitely want to give props up to, because it was through his show that I got hip to vintage jazz and the individuals that were key and responsible to it, and also some obscure people as well that hid behind, I won't say hid, but didn't get as much shine as, like, let's say, a Cab Calloway or somebody like that. I mean, you're talking about individuals such as Teddy Hill, you know, of course, who went on after his big band days were over with to become the manager at Minton's, which of course was the place where, one of the places where bebop or modern jazz was incubated. And he his version of How High the Moon and Don, D-O-N-B-Y, which he actually took from the chord changes of Juan Tizol's Perdido. So I didn't know that it was him, because after those two tunes played, I pressed pause once again and didn't get the information on them, so waited for the next music. So fast forward from 1982 to about 10 years later, I was at a record store called Sam's Jams back in Ferndale, Michigan. And they had a cutout bin, and in it, there was this 2-album set by Savoy called Don Byas Savoy Jam Party. I bought the album, it was like $3.99, and put it away for a while, and came back to it a couple of days later and listened to everything on there. I was like, God, this guy sounds familiar. He sounds a lot like Coleman Hawkins, but he has another, you know, it's a different thing that's going on with it. So I get to the second album, the first side, and I hear the familiar strains of the intro on How High the Moon. And I'm like, that's him. Whoa, yo, God. So everything just came together. That's Byas. So immediately from there, I was checking out Byas, and so I've been, you know, hip to him since I was 13, 14 years old, you know. Over the years, when I finally was able to record, you know, as a solo artist, I've always given up props to Byas. JC on the set, Worried in Blue was the first tune that I took of his off of there. Real Quiet Storm, 1944 Stomp. More recently, Gloria for Gardenias for Lady Day. So I mean, always through the years, I've always been holding Byas quite in high regard, because just like with when you think trumpet-wise, there's Louis Armstrong and then there's Dizzy Gillespie, and in the middle, that transitional figure was Roy Eldridge, you know, and Jabbo Smith, you know, were the transitional figures that were there, you know. And then, of course, and you hear Roy, you know, Dizzy talk about, oh yeah, Roy was my man, this, that, and other. Hawkins, and then there's also, you know, like Train, but in between was Byas, who had the swing element of Hawkins and this thick sound, but at the same time, he had the harmonic concepts of somebody that's looking towards a Train. So he was a transitional figure going into, you know, that end. And just very fascinated by him, you know, and just continued to keep up with him. So I was born in 1912. This past 2012, I presented, actually 2004, I was playing in Holland with the Concertgebouw Jazz Orchestra, and I was a guest along with trumpeter Ak van Rooyen. And we had a great gig. We did some Ellingtonia and some other things, and had an afterglow upstairs, you know, where the patrons and some of the VIPs were invited. So I made a toast and said I had a great time here, and I looked at where I was, and I was in Don Byas's adoptive homeland of Holland, which was where he died in 1972, and I said, I would be totally remiss if I didn't say that I would love to come back and do an evening of Don Byas music. The whole place erupted. So that was the catalyst for it all. And just off of saying that, 2 years later, in 2006 in Rotterdam at the very first North Sea Jazz Festival, I did the Living My Life, the music of Don Byas, with not only a quintet, but also the Concertgebouw Jazz Orchestra. We did it in 2 segments and all. So the full project is with my group as a quintet, also with the expanded big band as well. And eventually it'll be recorded that way, as you know. So fast forward from 2006 and the very first incarnation of the project to 2012, which would be Don Byas's centennial. I present the idea to the BIM House that I would love to do a centennial on the music of Don Byas. We've already done, you know, the 2006 version. And in addition to doing it in Rotterdam, we also did it a little while later in Amsterdam at the BIM House as well, with the full big band too. So they already had an idea as to what was, you know, going to happen there. So we okayed it, or they okayed it, you know, for the centennial concert to go down, and we put it on our respective websites. You know, this is upcoming and all. And as a result, a guy writes in to my website and says, oh, I'm so very happy that somebody from your generation knows Don Byas and his worth, and not only that, but to also give him, you know, centennial props, if you will, and to do this concert. I'm so going to be there. By the way, I happen to have an instrument with his name on it. Would you like to see it? And I'm thinking, oh, this cat's jiving, whatever, you know. So I didn't reply back to him for a couple of days. So 2-3 days later, he sends another email, and I hear nothing back from you. See the enclosed photos or whatever, you know. And he had 9 photos in there that had this instrument, you know. And I'm looking at it. Okay, it's on there. It has the snake thing on top, and his name's engraved. And okay. Oh, that's very interesting. And so I look up the serial number that's listed here, and I find out that it was made back in 1950. So there was one horn that he had from another Done as well that had a later serial number on it that I looked up, and it was made in 1962. So it's my understanding that he played this horn from 50 to 62, 63. Then he had this other horn that was made off of this particular model, and he played that the last 10 years of his life. So I emailed the guy back and said, yeah, I'll definitely take a look after he went through the trouble of sending the photos. Sure, and he goes about the process of having the horn refurbished to its original specs and all, with at the same time still retaining the, you know, the aura of the axe by not, you know, having it refinished or nothing. This is the original finish that Byas had, you know. So it's like, there it is, you know. So fast forward to the couple of days before the hit, I actually get into Holland a couple of days early, and he meets me at the hotel with this instrument, and I'm figuring, you know, at best maybe I'll just play maybe 1 or 2 tunes to, you know, to make that link, and then go back to my old horn. For the 3 days that I was there, my horn came out long enough for me to take the mouthpiece off and to put it on this horn. It did nothing else after that for the 3 days that I was there. This horn and I just became linked, and it was, this horn is possessed. It still has Byas's spirit in it. Just playing it, I mean, just, oh gosh, if you don't mind.
I love that. Oh, you can get it in? You get it in? Just give me just a second.
Yeah, give me a second too, because I need the strap that,
Oh, yeah.
hopefully it won't interfere with what we were talking about earlier, but.
Then we can edit all these different things. That is incredible, meant to be magical.
Okay, ready? So, yeah, so for the time that I was there, it was me and this instrument, you know, and just playing it and just hearing certain things off of it, and having so many questions answered about how he was able to play certain things, the glisses and the, it was like, I'm playing the horn and it's like a hand was pushing this down to tell me, this is how you do it, son, or whatever, you know.
Thank you for sharing that.
Oh,
It's like
yeah.
fabulous.
So,
It was meant to be, that is extraordinary.
thank you. Thank you, and I'm continued to be flabbergasted every time I pick up this horn, even when I go by the case, you know, to know that this horn exists and it's in my stewardship now, you know, and
That's right. It found you.
yeah, that's exactly how I look at it.
That is fantastic.
Because I didn't even know this horn existed. I thought the only one that,
Was the later one?
yeah.
That is extraordinary.
And actually see him playing this horn and knowing that you know, because there are many YouTube clips
Oh,
of him playing at the Cannes Jazz Festival in 1958. He played at Saint-Tropez Tropicana in 1955. There's some in-studio footage of him playing it in 1960, you know, and a bunch of stills of, you know, art album covers and stuff where he's playing it, and it's like, wow, to know that,
What a gift.
yeah.
What a gift.
Hey, this is James Carter, and I'm on the set with JazzTimes, and if you want more videos such as this, go and check out jazztimes.com. Dig you later.